Sarah Mitchell thought she had hit rock bottom working 3 jobs just to survive, taking care of her 6-year-old son Tommy, while struggling to keep them both afloat. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when Chicago's most ruthless millionaire, Marcus Mitchell, called her into his office to publicly humiliate her and fire her in front of her coworkers. As Sarah desperately begged for her job, her world crumbled around her. However, what Marcus didn't know was that the biggest shock of his life was about to walk through those mahogany doors in the form of a crying child who would change everything with just one word. When little Tommy bursts into the meeting room holding an old photograph and shouts the words that will forever destroy the carefully constructed world of Marcus, both their lives will be transformed in ways neither of them could have imagined.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The alarm never went off. Sarah Mitchell had been awake for 20 minutes, her eyes fixed on the peeling ceiling of the small apartment, mentally counting how many hours of sleep she had gotten. 3, maybe 4, if she was generous with herself. Her body ached as if she had been hit by a truck, but it was always like that. At 28, she felt as if she were 60. The wooden floor creaked under her bare feet as she got up from the narrow bed. On the other side of the room, separated only by a worn curtain with faded flowers, Tommy was sleeping deeply, his angelic face framed by messy brown hair. He was the only sight that could still bring a genuine smile to Sarah's tired face. Her 6-year-old boy, her reason for existing, her strength to carry on when the world seemed to be collapsing around them. The cold water from the tiny sink faucet fully woke her up. There was no mirror in the bathroom. It had broken 2 months ago, and she still hadn't managed to save up the $20 to buy another. Maybe it was better that way. She didn't want to see the purple dark circles she knew marked her face, nor how much weight she had lost in the past weeks. 9:45. In 15 minutes, she would need to leave for the night shift at Mitchell Industries Corporation, where she would spend the next 8 hours scrubbing marble floors and emptying executive trash cans of people who earned in a day what she took a month to make. The irony of fate, she had thought many times, working for a company with the same surname she carried. But Chicago was a big city, and Mitchell wasn't exactly a rare name. In the tiny kitchen, she quickly made a peanut butter sandwich for Tommy's lunch at school. She left a loving note stuck to the refrigerator. "Good morning, my love. Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Your breakfast is on the table. Don't forget to brush your teeth." The somewhat shaky handwriting revealed her exhaustion, but the heart behind every word remained strong. Sarah opened the warped living room cabinet and took out a small shoebox hidden behind some children's books. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. There it was, the photograph she kept like a dangerous treasure. An old photo, yellowed at the edges, of 2 smiling young people hugging under the sun of a summer that seemed to have happened in another life. Herself, 19 years old, eyes shining with hope and love. And beside her, she closed her eyes tightly and quickly put the photo back in the box. Some wounds never fully healed, only scarred enough not to bleed every day. But they hurt. My God, how they hurt. The blue uniform from the cleaning company hung behind the door, washed and ironed with the iron borrowed from the neighbor upstairs. Sarah, dressed in silence, pulled her brown hair back into a practical ponytail and grabbed the worn purse that held her savings, her documents, and her dreams kept under lock and key. Tommy stirred in bed, murmuring something in his sleep about dinosaurs and amusement parks. Sarah's heart tightened. When was the last time she had truly taken her boy out to have fun? When was the last time they had gone to the movies? Or eaten a hamburger in a real restaurant, and not from the $1 children's menu at some diner? She moved closer to the makeshift bed and gently kissed her son's forehead, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "Mommy's going to work now, my angel," she whispered against his soft hair. "When you wake up, Mommy will already be at her 2nd job, but Mrs. Martha will take you to school, okay?" Tommy sighed in his sleep, an unconscious smile playing on his lips. Sarah stayed there a few more seconds, engraving that peaceful image in her memory. Then, with a heavy heart but unshakable determination, she whispered the words she repeated every night like a prayer. "I will do anything to give you a better life, my love. Anything. Mommy promises." The door closed softly behind her, and Sarah descended the creaky stairs of the deteriorating building, walking toward the bus stop under the yellow light of the street lamps. Another night was beginning. Another battle in the silent war she waged every day to keep her small family standing. And she had no intention of giving up, ever. The sun rose over the skyscrapers of Chicago, painting the sky in golden hues that reflected off the mirrored windows of the Mitchell Industries Corporation building. On the 52nd floor, Marcus Mitchell stood before the glass wall that dominated his presidential office, gazing upon the city like an emperor surveying his domains. At 35 years old, he had transformed the company inherited from his grandfather into a billion-dollar empire, and every hard line on his sculpted face told the story of every battle won, every adversary crushed. The $3,000 Armani suit fit perfectly on his broad shoulders. The Rolex watch on his wrist was worth more than most people's homes. Marcus Mitchell was not just rich, it was the kind of wealth that transcended numbers, transforming into pure and absolute power. The intercom on the massive mahogany desk buzzed softly. "Mr. Mitchell," the secretary's nervous voice echoed through the luxurious room. "The 3 employees you requested are here." "Send them in," Marcus replied without turning, his deep voice carrying that naturally intimidating authority that had made seasoned executives tremble in board meetings. The door opened, and 3 people entered hesitantly. A middle-aged man with a face marked by stress, a young pregnant woman with slightly trembling hands, and a black young man who could not have been older than 25, all wearing the company's administrative uniforms. Marcus finally turned around, his cold blue eyes sweeping over the 3 like a predator assessing its prey. He didn't bother to ask their names. Employees were numbers, statistics on spreadsheets, replaceable pieces in the machine generating his billions. "Sit down," he ordered, vaguely gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk as he headed to his Italian leather armchair. The older man cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Mitchell, I've worked here for 15 years. I have 3 kids and a mortgage to pay. If I did something wrong..." Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off with an impatient gesture. "This has nothing to do with individual performance. It's simple business math." He opened a folder on the desk, pretending to consult documents he already knew by heart. "The company needs to optimize costs. Your departments will be outsourced." The pregnant woman instinctively placed her hand on her rounded belly. "But sir, the baby is due in 2 months. My husband is unemployed, and our health insurance." "That's not my problem," Marcus interrupted with glacial coldness. "You will receive 2 weeks' notice, as stipulated in your contract. Human Resources will provide the documents." The young man leaned forward, desperation showing in his eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, please. I know we don't know each other personally, but I work 60 hours a week here. I support my sick mother, and I'm paying off student loans. If you give me a chance." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. There was something viscerally satisfying about these moments of absolute power, when people depended entirely on his word, on his mercy. And Marcus Mitchell had never been known for mercy. "Do you want to know the difference between you and me?" he asked, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "You believe the world owes you something. I understood early on that the world is cruel, and only the strong survive. You are disposable." The word echoed through the room like a gunshot. The pregnant woman began to cry silently, tears running down her pale cheeks. The older man clenched his fists on his knees, helplessness consuming his face. The young man simply remained still, as if struck by lightning. "Security will escort you to your departments to collect your personal belongings. Good luck in life," Marcus said, already turning his attention back to the papers on his desk, as if the 3 people before him had ceased to exist. When the door closed behind the former employees, Marcus poured himself a generous glass of 40-year-old Scotch whiskey, savoring the amber liquid as if it were the taste of victory. Relationships had always been distractions for weak men. He had never married, never had children, at least none he knew of or cared about. Family was weakness, love was vulnerability, and Marcus Mitchell could not afford either. Night fell over Chicago, and the city lights began to flicker like distant stars. Marcus opened the employee performance reports spread across his desk, running his fingers over the lists of names, numbers, and evaluations. There were dozens of them, real people with real lives, dreams, and fears. To him, they were just data. "Let's see who else can be eliminated," he murmured to himself. Taking another sip of the expensive whiskey, as a predatory smile formed on his face. Down below, 52 floors beneath, the night cleaning shift began. Invisible people who kept his empire shining, who ensured he could arrive every morning at immaculate offices without ever thinking about the hands that worked through the night to make it happen. Marcus Mitchell did not think about those people. There was never a reason to think about them. Never. Marcus Mitchell's executive assistant, Richard Hawkins, nervously adjusted his tie as he reviewed the documents he had prepared overnight. At 42, Richard was an ambitious man who had gotten where he was by stepping on whoever was necessary. But lately, he felt his position was threatened. Other younger executives circled his role like vultures, and he needed to prove his worth to the most feared boss in Chicago. The idea had come up the previous night, after a few glasses of wine and a lot of resentment. If he couldn't find real problems to solve, why not create some? Marcus always valued employees who brought solutions to issues others didn't even notice. And the cleaning shift? Well, who would stand up for a bunch of janitors? Richard knocked on the president's office door exactly at 8 in the morning, carrying a folder full of carefully fabricated reports. "Come in," Marcus's voice echoed from inside the lavish room. Marcus was standing before the window, drinking his morning coffee from a Chinese porcelain cup that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. His blue piercing eyes turned to Richard with the intensity that made grown men stammer. "I hope you have something important, Hawkins. I don't have time for trivialities." Richard took a deep breath, savoring the moment of power he was about to exercise. "Mr. Mitchell, I discovered an alarming situation costing the company thousands of dollars monthly." Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly. "Go on." "The night cleaning shift is operating with unacceptable levels of negligence." Richard lied with the conviction of someone who had rehearsed every word. He opened the folder and spread falsified charts and reports over the mahogany desk. Constant delays, inadequately cleaned areas, poorly used equipment. Some employees even leave the building during work hours for personal emergencies. Marcus took one of the reports, his eyes scanning the fabricated data. "And you're sure about this information?" "Absolutely, sir. I installed a discrete monitoring system. The numbers don't lie." Richard pointed to a particularly elaborate chart. "Productivity has dropped 40% in the last 3 months. It's pure insubordination." Marcus's jaw tightened, that dangerous sign everyone in the company had learned to fear. 40%? And I was paying full salaries to those slackers? "Exactly, sir. But I have a proposal." Richard leaned forward, his eyes shining with malice. "If we publicly confront them all during the day, when they're supposed to be sleeping after their long work nights, we'll send a clear message. Discipline through example." Marcus walked to his chair, the Italian leather softly creaking under his weight. "You want me to force night shift employees to show up during the day?" "Yes, sir. If they're really committed to the job, they shouldn't mind a small sacrifice. And if they refuse to come..." Richard shrugged with feigned innocence. "Well, that will only confirm our suspicion about their lack of dedication." A cruel smile spread across Marcus's face. It was brilliant, actually. A show of power that would remind every employee, not just the cleaning staff who was in charge here. "Make the call. All night shift cleaning employees must appear today at 2 p.m. No exceptions. And if some claim other work commitments, then they'll have to choose their priorities," Marcus replied coldly. "Anyone who doesn't show up will be fired for abandonment of duty." Richard could barely contain his satisfaction. "I'll make the calls immediately, sir." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Sarah Mitchell had just fallen asleep when the phone rang. It was 11:15 in the morning, and her exhausted body had finally succumbed 4 hours after returning from her shift at Mitchell Industries. She had to rush home, change clothes quickly, and head to the diner where she had spent 8 hours serving hamburgers and cleaning tables. She had arrived home at 4 p.m. the previous day and spent another 3 hours sewing pant hems for a neighbor who paid $5 apiece. The shrill sound of the old phone sliced through her dreams like a siren. "Hello?" Her voice came out hoarse, confused. "Sarah Mitchell?" The voice on the other end was cold, professional. "Yes, that's me. This is Mitchell Industries Corporation. You are required to attend a disciplinary meeting today at 2 p.m. Attendance is mandatory." Sarah sat up in bed, heart racing. "Disciplinary meeting? I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" "My work has always been well evaluated. These are orders from the executive board. Report to the 52nd floor at 2 p.m., or you will be fired for abandonment of duty. But I work at night. I need to sleep during the day. I have another job at 7 in the morning and— The line went silent. Sarah stared at the phone in despair, her hands trembling. The 52nd floor, she had never been so high in the building. She had always worked on the lower floors, invisible like all cleaning staff. Why would the executive board want to see her? Tommy was at school, but she needed to pick him up at 3:30. If the meeting ran long, and her diner shift started at 7 p.m., if she lost either job, she wouldn't be able to pay next month's rent. With shaky legs, she got up and went to the wardrobe. She didn't have suitable clothes for the 52nd floor, but she did her best with a navy blue dress she wore to job interviews and a blazer bought at a thrift store years ago. "Mrs. Martha," she shouted, knocking on the door of the elderly neighbor who always helped her in emergencies. The door opened, revealing a gray-haired lady with kind eyes. "Sarah, dear, what happened? You look pale." "I need a desperate favor. Can you pick up Tommy from school today? I have a meeting at the company and don't know how long it will last." "Of course, dear, but are you okay? You look scared." Sarah hugged the woman quickly. "I don't know, Mrs. Martha. I don't know what's going on." The trip to downtown passed like a blur of anxiety. On the crowded bus, Sarah tried to imagine what she could have done wrong. She always arrived early, worked late when necessary, and had never had a single complaint in 2 years with the company. When the mirrored Mitchell Industries building appeared before her, Sarah had to stop for a moment to breathe. 52 floors of glass and steel, rising like an artificial mountain against the blue Chicago sky. She had never noticed how imposing it was from outside. She always arrived through the service entrance under cover of night. Her low-heeled shoes, the only ones she owned besides her work, sneakers echoed nervously on the marble floor of the main lobby. Executives in suits passed by as if she were invisible, carrying expensive folders and speaking on phones that cost more than her monthly salary. "Excuse me," she said to the security guard at reception, her voice lower than intended. "I have a meeting on the 52nd floor." The man looked her up and down with barely disguised disdain. "Name?" "Sarah Mitchell." He checked a list. "Executive elevator there. Someone from the board is expecting you." "You?" Sarah then noticed that others were waiting near the elevators. She recognized some faces from the night shift. They all looked as confused and nervous as she did. The elevator doors opened with a soft sound, and Sarah entered with her coworkers. 52 floors. She had never gone this high in her life. As the numbers increased on the digital display, her stomach twisted tighter and tighter. She couldn't lose this job. She couldn't. Tommy depended on her, and she was already at her limit, just keeping the bills paid. The doors opened, revealing a luxurious hallway that looked like it came out of a magazine. Persian rugs, polished wood panels, artworks that probably cost more than her entire house. "This way," said the impeccably dressed secretary, leading the small group down the corridor. Sarah swallowed hard, her steps unsteady on the expensive carpet. She had no idea she was walking toward the meeting that would change her life forever. She did not know that just a few meters away, the man she had loved and lost 7 years ago was waiting for her. The man whose son slept every night in her bed, dreaming of dinosaurs and amusement parks. The man who didn't even know he was a father. The conference room on the 52nd floor was a monument to power and wealth. A solid mahogany table dominated the center, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than anyone's car present. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago. But the 12 night shift employees nervously huddled at one end of the room could not appreciate the scenery. Sarah was among them, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to smooth down the navy blue dress that suddenly seemed cheap and inadequate under the relentless light of the crystal chandeliers. She recognized some of the faces around her. Maria, the Mexican lady who cleaned the bathrooms on the 20th floor. James, the young man with 2 jobs who always greeted her politely. Mrs. Peterson, the widow in her 50s who worked to support her daughter at university. They all looked as lost as she felt. The double doors opened with a dull thud, and Marcus Mitchell entered the room like an emperor entering his court. The charcoal gray suit was impeccable, every line perfectly cut to accentuate his imposing figure. His cold blue eyes swept the group of employees with the same interest one might show when examining trash on the sidewalk. Sarah instinctively lowered her gaze. There was something about that man's presence that made her feel small, insignificant. She had never seen the company's CEO cleaning staff were invisible to people like him. "Sit down," Marcus commanded, gesturing to the chairs on one side of the table. His voice echoed through the room with natural authority. They settled in silence, a group of hard-working people who suddenly felt like criminals awaiting sentencing. Sarah pulled out her chair slowly, trying not to make a sound, her eyes fixed on her own hands. Marcus remained standing, slowly walking along the table, like a general inspecting defeated troops. "You are here because it has come to my attention that the night shift's work standards are far below acceptable." The silence in the room was oppressive. Sarah could hear her own heart beating. "This company was built on principles of excellence," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a harder tone. "My grandfather founded Mitchell Industries with the belief that there is no room for mediocrity, incompetence, or laziness. Values that apparently some of you have chosen to ignore." Sarah swallowed hard. Laziness? She worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Her fingers were permanently marked by cleaning products. Her back constantly ached from bending over scrubbing floors. Reports indicate frequent tardiness, poorly executed work, and lack of dedication. Marcus lied as easily as he breathed. "You seem to have forgotten that you are easily replaceable." Maria, the Mexican lady, timidly raised her hand. "Sir, I always arrive early. My supervisor has never complained about my work." "I didn't ask about supervisors." Marcus cut her off abruptly. "Supervisors are condescending. I am talking about real results, concrete numbers." Sarah felt a surge of anger rising in her chest. She could not remain silent while honest people were being humiliated by lies. She took a deep breath and raised her hand slightly, her voice coming out lower than she intended. "Excuse me, sir," she said, trying to keep calm. I have worked here for 2 years and always received positive evaluations. I have other jobs as well, so I understand the importance of being punctual and responsible. I fulfill all my obligations and—" Marcus's eyes fixed on her with laser intensity. For the first time, he truly looked at one of the people in the room, and Sarah felt as if she were being pierced by ice. "Oh, so we have an efficiency expert here," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Other jobs? How convenient. You probably arrive here exhausted, do a half-assed job, and think you deserve praise." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "No, sir, I always do my best. I have a son to support and—" "Excuses," Marcus interrupted, pounding his hand on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "Excuses are for losers. I don't want to know about your personal circumstances, your difficulties, or your other jobs. I want results." He stepped closer to Sarah, his intimidating presence making her shrink in her chair. "You are the perfect example of what's wrong with employees like you. You think the world owes you. That having a child gives you the right to be lazy and incompetent." The words hit Sarah like slaps in the face. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she desperately tried not to let them fall. Not in front of that cruel man, not in front of her colleagues. "I'm not lazy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I work 16 hours a day. I do all I can to—" "You're dead weight," Marcus declared with surgical coldness. "An employee who consumes resources without offering equivalent value. Exactly the kind of person who drags companies down." Sarah could no longer hold back the tears. They silently ran down her cheeks as she tried to understand how she had ended up in this nightmare. Yesterday she was working normally, fulfilling her duties, taking care of Tommy. Today she was being destroyed by a man who didn't even know her name. "Please," she begged, her voice barely audible. "I need this job. I have bills to pay, rent due. My son—" "Your son is not this company's responsibility," Marcus replied with disdain. "Your personal choices do not interest me." He turned to the group, as if Sarah had ceased to exist. "Let her serve as an example for you. This is what happens when employees think they can hide behind pathetic excuses." He returned his icy gaze to Sarah, who was crumbling in her chair. "Pack your things and leave. You're fired." "No." Sarah stood up abruptly, desperation flooding her voice. "Please, Mr. Mitchell, I beg you, give me a chance." "I'll do anything. Work overtime. Accept a pay cut. Just don't fire me, please." Marcus regarded her with the same interest one might show a crushed insect. Security will escort you out. 5 minutes to collect your belongings. Sarah was openly sobbing now, but he didn't even blink. To Marcus Mitchell, she was just another disposable employee, another number removed from a spreadsheet. If he had looked more closely, he might have noticed something familiar in those tear-filled brown eyes. If he had paid attention to the Mitchell surname spoken by the secretary, if he had allowed his memory to go back 7 years, to a golden summer when he was young, reckless, and capable of love. But Marcus Mitchell had become an expert at not looking, not remembering, not feeling. And Sarah left the room shattered, unaware that she had just begged the father of her child. "Please, Mr. Mitchell." Sarah stood up from the chair so abruptly that she almost fell, her legs trembling like leaves in the wind. Tears ran freely down her face, but she no longer cared about dignity. "I beg you. My son. He's only 6 years old. I am all he has in the world." Marcus crossed his arms, a cruel smile playing on his lips, as if he were watching a particularly entertaining show. "So what? What does that have to do with me? I work 3 jobs to give him the basics," Sarah continued, her voice breaking with every word. "I wake up at 5 in the morning, sleep only 3 hours a night. My hands are destroyed from scrubbing floors. My back hurts so much that sometimes I can barely get up, but I do it with love because he deserves a chance in life." The desperate confession echoed through the luxurious conference room like a cry for help in an empty ocean. The other employees watched in shocked silence, some with tears in their own eyes, but no one dared to move or speak. Marcus laughed. It was a low, guttural sound, devoid of any trace of humanity. How touching. It must be so hard to be a heroic single mother. The words were loaded with such contempt that Sarah stepped back as if she had been slapped. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for a chance to work. You can reduce my salary, make me work overtime without extra pay. Anything. Just don't take away my chance to feed my son." "Personal responsibilities are not this company's problem," Marcus replied, circling around her like a shark stalking its prey. "You should have thought about these consequences before being incompetent at work." Sarah fell to her knees before him, hands clasped in supplication, completely oblivious to how pathetic she must have appeared to that powerful man's eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I will do anything. Anything. I will clean every inch of this building with my own hands if necessary. Just give me a chance." "Stand up," Marcus ordered with disgust. "You are humiliating yourself unnecessarily. Though, on second thought, maybe you should look for a job more suitable to your level." The deliberate pause was like a dagger. Sarah staggered to her feet, trying to understand what he was implying. "There are many establishments in the city that are not as strict as we are regarding professional competence," Marcus continued, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Second-rate bars, nightclubs, places where a desperate woman can make money using other talents." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the most frightened employees gasped at the brutal cruelty of the insinuation. Mrs. Peterson put her hand over her mouth, horrified. James clenched his fists, struggling against the urge to intervene. Sarah was frozen, as if the words had drained all the life from her body. How can you say that to me?" "I'm being practical," Marcus replied indifferently. "You clearly don't have the qualifications for a respectable job. Maybe it's time to accept reality." "I work honestly," Sarah shouted, all the pain and despair exploding in her voice. "I love my son more than life itself. I sleep on the floor so he can have a decent bed. How dare you suggest that I—" "Oh, here we go," Marcus sighed theatrically. "The heroic mother speech. You always do the same thing. You use your children as an excuse for everything." "I have a child. I need to work. I make sacrifices. I'm tired of hearing those pathetic stories." Every word was a stab to Sarah's heart. She looked around the room, searching for a trace of humanity anywhere. Any sign that someone would understand her desperation. "My son is no excuse for anything," she said in a voice hoarse from crying. "He is the reason I get up every day, the reason I endure pain and exhaustion. He is innocent and deserves—" "Spare me," Marcus interrupted, raising a hand. I don't want to hear about your domestic problems. You were fired for incompetence. End of discussion. Sarah staggered, holding onto the table to keep from falling. Tommy, my Tommy. How am I going to explain to him that Mommy lost her job? He's going to ask if we did something wrong, if we don't have a home anymore. That's not my problem, Marcus declared, already heading for the door. Security! Escort this woman out of the building immediately. 2 uniformed guards entered the room, their faces professional yet slightly uncomfortable with the scene they had witnessed. Sarah looked at them with pleading eyes, then back at Marcus. Please, she whispered one last time. If there is any compassion in your heart, my baby needs me. Marcus didn't even turn around. 5 minutes to gather your belongings. After that, you are no longer welcome here. As the guards gently escorted her through the luxurious corridors, Sarah felt as though she were walking down the death row aisle. Every step took her further away from stability, closer to the financial abyss she had spent years trying to avoid. In the employee locker room, she gathered her few personal belongings, a photo of Tommy in her wallet, a granola bar saved for emergencies, her worn coat. Her hands trembled so much she could barely open the locker. The elevator ride down to the ground floor seemed to last forever. When the doors opened onto the marble lobby, Sarah looked one last time at the building that had been her financial salvation for the past 2 years. On the Michigan Avenue sidewalk, under Chicago's relentless afternoon sun, Sarah finally collapsed completely. She leaned against a pole and cried like she hadn't since Tommy was born. People hurried past her, avoiding eye contact with yet another person destroyed by urban cruelty. How am I going to tell him? She murmured to herself, imagining Tommy's worried little face when she got home earlier than expected. How do I explain to a 6-year-old that Mommy wasn't good enough? The rent was due in 2 weeks. Without the salary from Mitchell Industries, even working at the diner and doing sewing, she wouldn't be able to pay. And then, eviction, shelters, the streets? Sarah pulled the cheap phone out of her pocket with trembling hands, dialing Mrs. Martha's number. Hello, dear, came the maternal voice on the second ring. Mrs. Martha. Sarah sobbed into the phone. Can you keep Tommy a little longer today? I need to think about some things before I see him. Because how does a mother look into her child's eyes and admit she failed to protect him from the cruel world? How does she find the strength to smile when her heart is completely shattered? The echo of Sarah's heels in the marble corridors was fading away when a different noise began to approach. Small, quick footsteps, desperately running through the luxurious halls of Mitchell Industries. The guards escorting Sarah stopped, confused, when they heard a child's sharp voice echoing off the walls lined with fine wood. Mommy! Mommy! Where are you? Sarah froze in the middle of the corridor, her heart pounding for a completely new reason. She knew that voice better than her own breath. Tommy? She whispered, incredulous. The double doors of the conference room swung open with a bang, and Tommy Mitchell burst in like a small storm of messy brown hair and rumpled clothes. His little blue eyes, so much like someone else's in the room, were red and swollen from tears, and he held a yellowed, crumpled photograph against his chest. Don't hurt Mommy, he shouted with all the strength his 6-year-old lungs could muster, running toward the guards still flanking Sarah. Leave her alone! The conference room, which moments before had been boiling with tension and cruelty, fell into absolute silence. The cleaning staff turned to watch the child, some with expressions of surprise and tenderness. Marcus, who was about to leave through the back door, stopped where he was, irritation clear on his face. Tommy threw himself into Sarah's arms, wrapping his thin little arms around her waist as if he could protect her from all the evil in the world. Mommy, why are you crying? What did they do to you? Sarah knelt quickly, pulling her son against her chest, trying to hold back the tears that began flowing again. Tommy, my love, what are you doing here? How? I left you with Mrs. Martha. I heard you crying on the phone, Tommy sobbed against his mother's shoulder. Mrs. Martha said you were sad, so I ran away when she wasn't looking. The gate guard let me in because I said you were my mommy and that you were hurt. Marcus approached with measured steps, his patience worn thin. What kind of circus is this? Security, remove this child immediately. This is not a playground. Tommy raised his tear-streaked little face, looking directly at Marcus with a bravery that starkly contrasted his small size. "You're mean. My mommy is good. She works hard and always takes care of me." "I don't care what your mother does," Marcus replied coldly, making an impatient gesture to the guards. "Children don't have access to this building. Remove them now." Then Tommy did something nobody expected. With little hands trembling with emotion, he raised the yellowed photograph he had been holding against his chest, extending it toward Marcus as if it were a weapon or a shield. "Don't hurt Mommy, Daddy," he shouted through tears, his voice breaking with childish desperation. "Please don't hurt her!" The world stopped. The word Daddy echoed through the conference room like a cannon shot, ricocheting off the wood-paneled walls and crystallizing everyone present into complete stillness. The noise of traffic down below, 52 floors beneath them, seemed to have vanished. Even the almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning became deafening in the absolute silence. Marcus looked down, his eyes automatically fixing on the photograph the child held. At first, he saw only a faded old image. Then, as his eyes focused, the blood began draining slowly from his face. It was him. 7 years younger, sun-kissed, smiling with a genuine joy he had forgotten he once had. His hair was longer then, less tamed by corporate gel. And next to him, radiant in a yellow summer dress, was Sarah. Not the broken, crying woman before him, but the 19-year-old Sarah, eyes shining with love and hope. Leaning against his shoulder as if he were her whole world, Marcus's legs trembled imperceptibly. That summer in Michigan, the lake, the promises whispered under the stars. Sarah Mitchell. No, Sarah Thompson then. The girl he had loved with the desperate intensity of youth, before his father found out about the relationship and demanded he choose between the family empire and that girl with no future. He had chosen the empire. He always knew he would. But Sarah had disappeared. He never found her again, never knew what happened to her after that golden summer he buried deep in his memory, along with all other traces of his lost humanity. Tommy still held the photograph with his little hands, tears streaming down his cheeks, waiting for an answer that didn't come. And Marcus finally, truly, looked at the child. Blue eyes. Not just blue, but exactly the same shade as his own. The shape of the face, the jawline, even the way the boy furrowed his brows when determined. It was like looking at a miniature version of himself. 6 years old. Tommy was 6 years old. The math was simple and devastating. Marcus Mitchell, the man who had spent his entire life believing he had no family but himself, was looking directly into the eyes of his son. The son whose existence he had completely ignored. The son who had just humiliated the mother to the point of breaking her. The son who was calling him daddy, while begging him to stop hurting the only person he loved in the world. Marcus remained motionless, paralyzed by the revelation that rewrote his entire self-understanding in one devastating moment of clarity. In the silent room, the sound of Tommy's ragged breathing echoed like thunder. The silence in the conference room was so dense it seemed to have a physical substance, weighing down on everyone present like a shroud. Marcus remained still, his eyes shifting between Tommy's face and the yellowed photograph, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. His mind, normally so sharp and calculating, had become a whirlwind of memory fragments that refused to fit together. Tommy kept crying, but now the sobs were smaller, interspersed with sniffs as he clung to Sarah's legs like a desperate koala. "He's my daddy in the picture, Mommy," he said through his tears, his high-pitched voice echoing in the lavish room. "You said he left, but still loves me. Why is he being mean to you?" Sarah felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. 7 years. 7 years keeping this secret, protecting Tommy from rejection, protecting Marcus from knowledge that could complicate his perfect life. And now everything was falling apart in the worst possible way, in front of strangers, in front of the very man who had chosen money over their love. "Tommy, no," she whispered desperately, trying to hush her son as her hands trembled. "Please, dear, don't talk about this here. Let's go home and—" "But, Mommy, he's making you cry," Tommy protested, pointing at Marcus with his free little hand. "You said daddies protect mommies. Why isn't he protecting you?" The brutal innocence of the child's words hit everyone present like a punch to the stomach. The cleaning staff exchanged shocked glances, beginning to grasp the enormity of what they were witnessing. Mrs. Peterson put her hand over her heart, her eyes filling with tears. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. Sarah. The name emerged from his throat, as if it had to be torn out forcibly. Is it true? Sarah raised her eyes to meet his, and for a microscopic moment, the masks fell. He was no longer the ruthless CEO. She was no longer the humiliated employee. They were just two people who once loved each other, now separated by a chasm of pain and lost time. Yes, she answered, the word coming out as a defeated sigh. Tommy is your son. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant noise of traffic downstairs and Marcus's heavy breathing, as if he were trying to process information that completely rewrote his reality. Why, he began, but the words died on his lips. Why didn't I ever tell you? Sarah finished for him, a mixture of desperation and old anger coloring her voice. Do you really want me to answer that here, in front of all these people? Tommy looked between the two adults, his childish confusion growing amid the tension he couldn't fully understand. Mommy, why are you talking weird? Why doesn't Daddy hug us? Tommy, dear, let's go, Sarah said, trying to take her son's hand, but he refused to move. No, Tommy shouted, planting his feet firmly on the floor. I want to stay with my daddy. I waited so long. Marcus finally moved, taking a staggering step toward them, as if walking in a dream. When did you find out that you were? 2 weeks after you left, Sarah answered, her voice gaining strength through the pain. 2 weeks after you told me that we were just a summer fling, and that you had real responsibilities waiting for you in Chicago. The words hit Marcus like stones. Memories began to crystallize Sarah on the lake pier, tears running down her face, begging him not to leave. Him saying cruel things because it was easier to hurt than admit he still loved her. Because his father had made it clear that if he didn't choose the company, he would lose everything. I didn't know, he murmured. And I never wanted anything from you, Sarah declared, her voice laden with a wounded dignity she had carried for 7 years. I never asked for child support, never looked for lawyers, never tried to contact you. I raised my son alone because you made it clear you didn't want commitments. Tommy tugged at the hem of Sarah's dress. Mommy, are you mad at Daddy? Did he do something wrong? The innocent question echoed through the room like an accusation. Marcus looked at the boy his son and saw his own features reflected in that worried little face. The same blue eyes that stared back at him in the mirror every morning, now full of tears and confusion. Marcus whispered, realization hitting him like a tsunami. I just humiliated, fired, the mother of my own child. The cleaning staff watched in shocked silence, witnesses to a family tragedy unfolding before their eyes. Maria whispered a prayer in Spanish. James clenched his fists, fighting the anger at what he had witnessed. Marcus staggered back until he found his chair, falling heavily into it as if his legs had lost the ability to support him. His hands trembled as he covered his face, trying to process the devastating magnitude of what he had just discovered. Tommy was his son. The child who called him daddy with so much love and hope was his own flesh and blood. And he had spent the last 15 minutes systematically destroying the woman who had raised that boy alone, who had sacrificed everything to give him a decent life. My God, he murmured through his fingers. What have I done? What have I done? The photograph was still in Tommy's hand, a silent testament to a love that once existed, to broken promises, and to a future that could have been completely different if only. If only he had been a man enough to choose love over fear 7 years ago. Marcus slowly removed his hands from his face, and when his eyes were revealed, they were shining with a moisture he hadn't felt in decades. All the calculating hardness, all the business coldness he had cultivated like armor over the years crumbled like a house of cards before the devastating reality unfolding in front of him. 6 years. 6 years of his son's life that he had lost forever. Uncelebrated birthdays, first steps he hadn't seen, first words he hadn't heard. Nights when Tommy might have asked where his daddy was, and Sarah had to invent answers to protect a heart too small to understand abandonment. Tommy, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking on the name. It was the first time he had uttered his own son's name. The boy stopped clinging to Sarah's legs and looked at Marcus with those blue eyes identical to his, still wet with tears, but filled with a shy hope that broke his heart. "Daddy, why are you making Mommy cry?" Tommy asked with a brutal honesty that only children possess. "My teacher said daddies protect families. You should hug Mommy when she's sad." Each word was a stab to Marcus's conscience. He looked at Sarah, seeing for the first time not the employee he had humiliated, but the woman he had loved in youth, the mother who had raised his son alone while he built empty empires. Sarah pulled Tommy closer to her protective arms wrapping around the boy's thin shoulders. "Let's go, Tommy. It was a mistake coming here." "No." Marcus stood up abruptly from the chair, desperation making his voice sharper. "Please, Sarah, don't go away. Not again." She stopped mid-step but didn't turn around. "Again. You left, Marcus. You chose to leave my life, remember?" "I know," he admitted, the word escaping like a groan of pain. "I know I was a coward. I know I chose money over love. I know I abandoned you when I should have stayed. But I didn't know, my God, Sarah, I didn't know about Tommy." Tommy looked between the two adults, trying to decipher the tension he felt but didn't understand. "Mommy, why are you talking about leaving? Isn't Daddy going to live far away from us anymore?" The innocent question broke something fundamental inside Marcus. He approached slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, and then did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He knelt down on the floor. There, in the middle of the luxurious conference room that represented everything he had accomplished at the cost of his humanity, Marcus Mitchell knelt before his 6-year-old son. "Tommy," he said, tears streaming freely down his face, "Daddy did very bad things. I hurt your mommy, and that was terrible. Forgive me?" Tommy tilted his little head to the side, studying Marcus's face with the seriousness of a child trying to understand the adult world. Then, with the simple wisdom only little ones possess, he extended his tiny hand and gently touched Marcus's wet cheek. "You won't make Mommy cry anymore?" he asked in a whisper. "Never again," Marcus promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I promise, Tommy. I'll never hurt your mommy again." Tommy's little eyes lit up with a pure joy Marcus had never seen before. "So now you're going to live with us? We'll be a real family? Like the families on television?" The question hit Marcus like lightning. Family. When was the last time he had thought of that word as more than an obligation? When was the last time he imagined waking up every morning next to people who loved him not for what he owned, but simply for who he was? Sarah finally turned, her red eyes fixed on Marcus. "Tommy, dear, it's not that simple." "Why not, Mommy?" Tommy protested, letting out that childish frustration at the unnecessary complication of the adult world. "I already have you. Now I have Daddy. Why can't we all stay together?" Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing for the first time in years what truly mattered. Not quarterly profits, not multi-billion-dollar mergers, not business achievements forgotten before the ink dried on the contracts. It was this woman and this child. The family he had rejected out of fear, ambition, for all the wrong reasons that now seemed pathetic and empty. "Sarah," he said, still kneeling, still vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I've spent 6 years proving I'm exactly the kind of man Tommy shouldn't have as a father. But please, give me a chance?" She watched him for a long moment, memories of pain and abandonment fighting against the flicker of hope she saw in his eyes. "A chance for what, Marcus?" "To be the father he deserves," Marcus replied, his voice filled with a sincerity that was almost painful to hear. "To be the man you deserved 7 years ago. To change everything in my life if necessary." The cleaning staff watched silently, witnesses to a transformation that seemed impossible moments before. Here was the most powerful man in Chicago, kneeling on the floor, begging not for profits or achievements, but for the chance to be loved. "Mommy," Tommy said softly, tugging on the hem of Sarah's dress. "Daddy is crying too. I think he's very sad for having lost so much time away from us." From a child's mouth, the truth sounded absolute and unshakable. Marcus closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the full weight of 6 lost years, of wasted love, of a family that had existed without him knowing. But he also felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to start over. The days following the revelation in the conference room were a whirlwind of changes that no one at Mitchell Industries could have predicted. Marcus Mitchell, the CEO, feared for his coldness, summoned Richard Hawkins to his office the next morning with an expression the assistant could not decipher. "Your services are no longer needed," Marcus said bluntly, his voice filled with a cold disdain that made Richard pale. "And don't bother making up more lies. I know exactly what you did with the cleaning reports." Richard tried to stammer an explanation, but Marcus raised his hand. "You have 1 hour to clear your desk. The security guards will escort you out." In the following weeks, the company underwent a transformation that left all employees baffled. Marcus personally visited every member of the night cleaning shift, offering formal apologies and not only reinstatement, but promotions and substantial raises. Maria, the Mexican lady, was promoted to cleaning supervisor with a salary that would allow her to bring her husband from Mexico. James received a full scholarship to finish his studies while continuing to work part-time. Even more surprising was the announcement of a new corporate program, the Mitchell Family Support Fund, aimed at employees who are single parents, offering assistance with child care, medical aid, and interest-free loans for emergencies. The news spread through the company like wildfire. For Sarah, Marcus made an offer that took her 3 days to believe was real. "Director of Human Resources," he repeated when she remained silent across the desk in his office. "A salary of $140,000 annually, full benefits, flexible hours, so you can be present in Tommy's life." Sarah watched him with suspicion, still protecting the heart that had been broken once. "Why, Marcus? Guilt?" "Because you are the strongest woman I know," he answered without hesitation. "You raised an amazing child alone, worked 3 jobs without ever giving up, and still found time to sew at night. If that's not qualification to lead human resources, I don't know what is." But the real test came when Marcus, with a humility Sarah had never seen in him, asked to properly meet her son. "I don't want to force anything," he said, his large hands trembling slightly. "I want to respect your time. I just want a chance to learn how to be a dad." The first visits were tense, formal. Marcus arrived at Sarah's small apartment with expensive gifts that Tommy treated politely but without the enthusiasm he hoped for. The boy was confused, torn between the excitement of finally having a father and the instinctive fear that he would disappear again. It was only when Marcus stopped trying to impress and simply began to be present that things changed. "Daddy Marcus," Tommy said one Saturday afternoon, "do you know how to ride a bike?" It was the first time he used the word daddy addressed to him, and Marcus felt something melt in his chest. "Of course I do. Why?" "Mine has 2 little training wheels, but I wanted to learn without them. Mom said that when I was big enough." "You're big enough now," Marcus said impulsively. "Want me to teach you?" The rest of the afternoon was a revelation. Marcus, who didn't remember the last time he had gotten his hands dirty with anything other than document ink, spent hours running alongside Tommy's bike in the park, his expensive clothes stained with grass, sweat dripping down his face as he shouted encouragements. "I did it! Daddy Marcus, I did it!" Tommy shouted when he finally rode alone for the first time, and Marcus felt a joy purer than any billion-dollar profit had ever brought. Sarah watched them from a nearby bench, seeing Marcus genuinely happy in a way she had never witnessed. When he carried Tommy on his shoulders back home, both laughing and excitedly talking about bikes, she felt the defenses around her heart start to soften. The changes deepened gradually. Marcus began showing up at Tommy's school meetings, sitting proudly in the front row when his son presented a project on dinosaurs. He canceled important meetings so as not to miss school plays, leaving executives baffled and waiting while he applauded enthusiastically in the crowded auditorium. The night that changed everything was when Tommy had nightmares about monsters under the bed. Sarah was working late in her new office when the phone rang. "Sarah, it's Marcus. Tommy is here with me, but he's scared to sleep alone. Do you mind if I stay with him until you get here?" When Sarah arrived at the apartment, they had moved to a bigger place. Courtesy of the new job, she found Marcus lying on Tommy's new bed, reading "Where the Wild Things Are" in a soft, comforting voice. Tommy was nestled against his chest, finally relaxed after the tears. And Max said to the monsters, "Be still," Marcus read, making a funny voice that made Tommy giggle quietly. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, watching. This was the man she had loved at 19, beneath all the layers of hardness and ambition. The kind man who once whispered promises about stars and the future. When Tommy finally fell asleep, Marcus carefully got up and went to find Sarah in the living room. "Thank you," she said. "He has nightmares sometimes." "Usually I—" "Sarah," Marcus interrupted gently, "I want to be here for that too. For the nightmares, stomach aches, scraped knees, for everything." It was on a Sunday morning, while making pancakes in the Kachina tradition they had started, that the moment Marcus would keep forever happened. Tommy was trying to flip a pancake and splattered batter on Marcus, who pretended to be mortally wounded by the pancake explosion. Laughing at the dramatic act, Tommy casually said, "Dad, you're really funny." Not Daddy Marcus. Dad. Marcus froze, the spatula suspended in the air, looking at the boy who kept laughing, completely unaware of the monumental meaning of what he had just said. "What's wrong, Dad? Why did you stop?" Tommy asked, tilting his head. Marcus knelt by the stove, pulling Tommy into a hug that the boy returned naturally, without hesitation. "Nothing, son," Marcus murmured against the soft hair. "Absolutely nothing is wrong." And for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Mitchell felt he was exactly where he belonged. Not in meeting rooms or gala dinners, not closing million-dollar deals. But there, in the small kitchen, with pancake batter splattered on his expensive shirt, being called Dad by the boy who had become the center of his universe. Sarah watched them from the kitchen entrance, tears of happiness shining in her eyes, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could be a family. 6 months later, the red brick house on Maple Street, in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, was unrecognizable. What was once an ordinary residence now overflowed with life and laughter. Marcus had deliberately chosen not to force Sarah and Tommy to move to his mansion on Lakeshore Drive instead. He bought the house next to theirs, tore down the fence that separated them, and created a single backyard where Tommy could run freely between the two properties. The change did not go unnoticed by the neighbors. Mrs. Martha, the elderly neighbor who had always cared for Tommy, nearly fainted when she discovered that the man now mowing the lawn on Sundays and teaching her Hart grandson to play baseball was the same billionaire CEO who appeared on the covers of Forbes. "I've never seen a transformation like this," she confided to Sarah one September afternoon, watching Marcus in the yard, his sleeves rolled up as he helped Tommy build a treehouse. "This man seems to have found his soul." At Mitchell Industries, the change was even more dramatic. The company, once feared for its ruthless methods, was now featured on business magazine covers for a completely different reason. Marcus's Families First program became a national model, with other corporations sending delegations to study how a company could be both profitable and humane at the same time. "Dad, promise you'll come to my school play next Friday?" Tommy asked one October morning while Marcus helped him get dressed for another day of school. "I promise, son." "Front row, as always," Marcus replied, adjusting the tiny tie Tommy insisted on wearing to look just like Daddy. "And will you pick Mom up from work afterward?" "Of course. How about dinner at Gino's?" Tommy hugged him tightly. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Tommy. More than all the stars in the sky." It was a phrase Sarah used to say, and Marcus had adopted it as his own daily promise to his son. The marriage proposal happened on an ordinary November day, without fanfare or extravagance. Marcus was helping Tommy with his math homework at the kitchen table when Sarah came home from work, tired but smiling. "How was your day, boys?" "Dad taught me how to do sums with my fingers," Tommy announced proudly. "And he said that when I learn to multiply, he'll teach me how to calculate how much ice cream costs." Sarah laughed, kissing the top of her son's head before turning to Marcus. "And how was your day, executive?" "Perfect," Marcus answered, and he truly meant it. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped out to the porch, where the city lights shimmered in the distance. Marcus took her hands, noticing how they no longer trembled when he touched them. "I know this might seem sudden," he began, "but I haven't been able to stop thinking. I don't want to live in separate houses anymore. I don't want to wake up without you. I want us to be a real family." Sarah studied him, searching for any sign of the arrogance or manipulation that once hurt her. Instead, she saw only sincerity and a love that had grown not from youthful passion, but from the daily choice to put their needs before his own. "Marcus, I know there's still a lot to forgive," he quickly continued. I know I have a lot to prove, but Sarah, I've changed. Not for you, not for Tommy, but for all of us. For who I want to be when I see you both in the morning." "You don't have to prove anything," Sarah said softly. "You already have. Every day for the last 6 months." The formal proposal came later, with Marcus literally kneeling on the porch, a simple but beautiful ring in his trembling hands. Tommy peeked through the window, silently applauding when Sarah said yes. The wedding took place in January, in a small ceremony at the neighborhood church where Tommy had been baptized. Sarah wore a simple white cotton dress. Marcus, a suit he had bought at an ordinary neighborhood store. Tommy, beaming in his little rented tuxedo, served as the ring bearer, carrying the rings with the seriousness of a diplomat. "This is a family making a promise," the priest said during the ceremony. "Not just a man and a woman, but 3 people choosing to love and support each other." When Marcus kissed Sarah, Tommy applauded so loudly the whole congregation laughed. "Now we're a real family," he shouted, and there wasn't a person in the church whose heart didn't warm. The honeymoon was a weekend in Wisconsin, the 3 together in a cabin by the lake. Marcus taught Tommy to fish. Sarah taught Marcus how to make s'mores properly. And for the first time in decades, none of them thought about work, responsibilities, or anything but being together. Back in Chicago, Marcus continued implementing changes. The Mitchell Educational Fund ensured that all employees' children had access to quality education. He personally mentored single parents, offering not only financial support but practical advice on balancing career and family. "You have become a role model," Sarah commented one spring evening as they watched Tommy play in the backyard with other neighborhood boys. "I learned from the best teacher," Marcus replied, pointing to his son. "That boy taught me that love isn't something you buy or earn. It's something you give freely." One May Saturday, the family was having a picnic in Grant Park. It was a perfect spring day, with the sun shining over Lake Michigan and Tommy running among the trees with a kite Marcus had bought at a toy store on the corner. "Dad, Mom, look!" Tommy shouted, managing to raise the red and blue kite into the air. "It's flying!" Marcus and Sarah sat on a worn blanket, watching. There were wealthy families around with elaborate picnic baskets and expensive toys, but none seemed happier than theirs. "Do you regret anything?" Sarah asked, offering Marcus a peanut butter sandwich he had learned to love. Marcus considered the question, watching Tommy struggle to control the kite. His tongue focused between his teeth just as his own did when he concentrated. "I regret missing the first 6 years of his life," he said finally. "I regret hurting you. I regret being so blind that I almost lost the only thing that really matters." Tommy came running toward them, breathless and radiant. "Dad, did you see? The kite flew as high as the buildings." "I saw, champ," Marcus said, pulling the boy into a hug. "You're amazing. We're an amazing family," Tommy corrected with the simple wisdom of a child. "Aren't we, Mom?" Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing not the powerful man who had conquered the business world, but the father who had chosen to conquer something much harder, the ability to love unconditionally. "Yes, dear," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "We're an amazing family." As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in golden and red hues, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them there. He had everything he thought he wanted: money, power, success, but he had almost lost everything he truly needed. A 6-year-old boy, with blue eyes and a pure heart, had taught him that true wealth is not measured in dollars or corporate achievements. It is measured in shared laughter, in freely given hugs, in nights spent reading bedtime stories. "Thank you," he whispered, looking at Tommy and Sarah. "For what?" Sarah asked. "For giving me a second chance. For teaching me that it's never too late to choose love." Tommy, who had nestled between them on the blanket, looked up with that smile that still made Marcus's heart melt. "Dad, now you'll never leave again, right?" Marcus kissed his son's forehead, a promise sealed with all the love he had learned to feel. "Never again, Tommy. I promise. No matter what happens, I'll always be here." And for the first time in his life, Marcus Mitchell made a promise he knew he would keep forever. The rest of their lives stretched ahead like a golden horizon, full of simple possibilities and everyday joys. And he couldn't imagine anything more valuable than that. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.